and welcome to Combat Mission Cold War, where we're going out for the day with the Soviets to learn how they fight. Surprisingly, there's not really that much out there about how the Soviet army actually fights at the level represented by Combat Mission. Trying to judge from old Soviet propaganda footage or Western training videos is somewhat difficult, not only because they tend not to show the whole picture, but because the picture you do tend to see is lots of stuff rushing forwards in a way that really doesn't work when you try and replicate it in Combat Mission. Luckily, Combat Mission Cold War comes with a series of scenarios that explain it all, and we're going to play through the first one, the Motor Rifle Battalion Deliberate Attack. The deliberate attack part here is important. We haven't just bumped into the enemy and thrown on an attack because they're there. This is an attack with significant planning and preparation. Reconnaissance forces have already located the enemy's defensive positions, target reference points for the artillery have already been plotted, and the battalion has already made its approach and deployed. So a lot of groundwork has gone into this before the start of the scenario. We're just dealing with the actual attack, we're just dealing with the pointy end. But the preparatory components are just as, if not more, important. Our actual force here is a full motor rifle battalion. Out in front we have a tank company with 13 T-64As about 75 meters apart. Behind the tanks we have two motor rifle companies in BTRs, with the rifle platoons up front, and the company HQ weapons platoon and attached man-portable air defense teams from the air defense platoon in more BTRs behind. These are all about 50 meters apart. The third motor rifle company is following up, still in march column on the road, standing by to exploit, along with the rest of the air defense platoon. Right at the back is the battalion HQ, the mortar battery HQ, and the two shilkers of the air defense artillery section. Finally, out on the left we have the automatic grenade launcher platoon, and on the right we have the anti-tank platoon with a mix of AT-4 ATGMs and SPG-9 McCallers rifles, all again in BTRs. It's important to think about distances and spacings here. We're starting off over 2,000 meters away from the enemy behind some convenient terrain, and the frontage of our main body is about 1,000 meters. Starting off, we've only got 300 meters worth of depth between the tank company and the back of our lead motor rifle companies, but that's going to increase when we get started. So although we've got a significant force here, it's very spread out, and the effectiveness of enemy artillery and air support, even if it's armed with cluster munitions, is going to be quite significantly reduced. And it's going to get reduced even more when we start moving and we stop being a stationary target. Of course, we're still going to be vulnerable to direct fire weapons like tank cannon and ATGMs, which is why we have a massive amount of artillery support. The battalion has 6 of its own organic 120mm mortars, which are currently off map, but for this attack we're being supported by the Regimental Artillery Group, which has 3 batteries of 120mm howitzers, so 18 tubes in total, and a rocket battery of 6 BM-21s. This adds up to 720 122mm rockets and 1,260 122mm high explosive shells, and what we want to do is dump all of this directly onto the enemy positions. In a perfect world, all the high explosive would annihilate the enemy completely and we'd be able to roll over the smouldering ruins. It's not a perfect world though, and although some elements of the enemy force will be destroyed or degraded, some of them are going to survive. While the artillery is dropping though, the enemy is going to be suppressed, and the smoke and dust thrown up by the bombardment, along with specific smoke emissions from the 120mm mortars on the flanks, is going to blind him, and we can take advantage of that to get our more local fire support into position. So while the artillery is keeping the enemy's heads down, we can send the grenade launcher and anti-tank platoons out on either flank and get them deployed. The anti-tank platoon in particular is going to be extremely important because we want to be picking off any enemy tanks or ATGM vehicles we can before we actually start advancing. With any luck they can do some damage while the artillery is still coming in. As all the fire missions come to an end, it's time to get moving. We want our tank company to advance up to the top of the ridge and then stop. The enemy has just been hammered with the arty. He's hopefully lost a few anti-tank assets already, and now he has to deal with 13 T-64s rolling up right in front of him. Hopefully the lingering smoke and dust thrown up by the bombardment, plus any existing losses, are going to make the enemy's response fragmentary. So instead of having all of the enemy's tanks or ATGMs open up on our T-64s at the same time, which would be a problem, with any luck, the enemy should be engaging individually or in small numbers. This is a big deal because if one or two M60s or tow vehicles engage our tanks, the entire T-64 company and the anti-tank platoon are in position to return fire. Concentrating all of our firepower on individual targets as they reveal themselves is a lot more effective than trying to fight a kind of one-on-one free-for-all if there are a lot of targets. At the same time, the enemy's incoming fire is going to be less effective than it could be due to the long range. We're still 2,000 meters out, so earlier marks of the M60 especially are going to struggle to make first round hits, and while tow missiles are more accurate, they travel at a lower speed and need to be guided onto their targets, giving the T-64s time to spot and engage the launch units. Despite all of this, we might still take some losses. That's okay. Casualties do not matter. What matters is achieving the breakthrough. If we use up our entire force breaking through and the battalion is absolutely decimated and combat ineffective, we still broke through, so the mission is still a success. There are more battalions behind ours standing by to pass through and exploit. We do still need to advance though. The aim here is not to wipe out the enemy or occupy his positions. We're aiming to break through his defences, and we obviously can't do that from 2 kilometers away. So after taking a chunk out of the surviving enemy defences from their first position, the T-64s go forward again. Soviet tanks are much better at shooting from a stationary position than they are at shooting on the move. So it's a matter of pushing forward a bit, stopping, blasting anything that gets spotted, and then pushing forward a little bit more. As the angles expand and more enemy units open fire, more targets are going to reveal themselves. About 400 meters behind the tanks come the 2 leading motor rifle companies in their BTRs. This again is going to present more targets to the enemy, but anyone engaging the BTRs is going to be revealing their positions to the T-64 and the fire support assets on either flank. The aim here is to get the infantry inside the BTRs close enough to the enemy positions for a dismounted assault, if necessary. Ideally, at this stage, all of the enemy anti-tank assets have been knocked out, and friendly armour can simply destroy enemy threats that they identify, in which case there's no need for a dismounted assault. It's much better to stay inside the vehicles, keep the speed of the attack up, and push forward to the breakthrough. As I keep saying, we're not here to totally wipe the enemy out, we're here to punch a hole in his defences and plough on through. If we can rupture the enemy defense to the point that we can operate with impunity, then the enemy has been sufficiently neutralized and we could ignore the survivors, rolling past or over them as we keep moving forward. If we do need to dismount our infantry to clear out the enemy defense though, the procedure is to advance until the BTRs are about 400 meters away from the enemy, stop, suppress the hell out of actual or suspected enemy positions, get the infantry out, and then move them up to about level with the tanks. The BTRs should stay back. Once the infantry and the tanks are together, they can advance in unison, with the tanks protecting the infantry and the infantry protecting the tanks, until the range is close to the point where the enemy has been destroyed or we're sitting in his position. When I played the scenario through for this video, the enemy surrendered after about 20 minutes, by which time he had lost all of his anti-tank assets, and I could simply roll through him with no problems. The dismounted assault was not worth the time and effort. The vast majority of enemy casualties were caused by the artillery, which should not surprise anyone, and the vast majority of his vehicle casualties was split between the T-64s and the AT platoon, with the tanks accounting for 2/3 of the M60s and M150s out there. My own casualties were very low. In the main assault, 2 of the T-64s were lost, and a few tank commanders were injured or killed when they were opened up. All the rest of my casualties came from the AT platoon, which attracted enough attention to itself to get hit by the enemy artillery. If I'd been a bit smarter, spread them out more and moved them around, that would have been significantly less of a problem, but at the same time, they got their job done, and any artillery falling on them was not falling on the main effort. So this really does work. This is how Soviet motor rifle battalions are supposed to conduct deliberate attacks. smother the enemy with as much artillery as possible, set up a base of fire with the fire support platoons, bring the tanks up, engage and destroy fragments of the enemy defense at long range as they reveal themselves, then punch forward and keep punching forward until the enemy has been neutralized and the breakthrough has been achieved. There are caveats, notably that this is something of a demonstration / training scenario under ideal conditions. Trying to pull this off under different circumstances is going to be a lot more difficult, but it's really interesting to see how the tactical nuts and bolts fit together here, and finally time for the Soviet era kit to shine in the way it was intended to be used. If you own the game and you want to play through this mission, it comes with the base game, and all of the instructions and guidance you need to perform this kind of attack are in the mission briefing. And of course there are 3 more Soviet doctrinal scenarios like this. A massive shout out to Captain Miller for making these, they are really helpful. Hope you all enjoyed this video, found it useful, and I'll see you in the next one.